I am standing in a cemetery, and that might seem like an odd place to do a devotion, but the reason is because today our passage is Genesis chapter 23. In this chapter, we see Abraham looking for a place to bury his precious wife Sarah, who has died. And so he's in the land of the Hittites. Actually, today we know where she is buried. It's in Israel, just south of Jerusalem, in the city of Hebron. They built a mosque on top of it, but there's a little hole in the floor. You can look down and see the cave where Sarah is buried. And Abraham, and later Isaac and Rebekah would be buried there, as well as Jacob and Leah. But for now, it's Abraham looking for a place to bury his wife. And he identifies a cave. It's the cave of Machpelah. And that's the cave he wants, and he purchases that with a field as well. But these people respected him so much, they said, well, we'll give it to you. And he said, no, I'm going to purchase it. So he purchases the cave where he can bury his wife, and the field that surrounds it as well. It's interesting that Abraham said, I'm a stranger, I'm a foreigner among you. Well, remember, this is the promised land. God has given the land to Abraham and his descendants, but he calls himself a stranger in the land of promise. Later in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 9, the Bible actually says that Abraham, by faith, lived as a stranger in a foreign land, even though he was in the land of promise. So this takes faith. He buried his wife there. He wanted to make sure he buried her there because he believed God that one day this would be his future inheritance and that of all of his descendants. It reminds me a little bit of something that happened in Jeremiah chapter 32. You see another purchase of land and all of the details and how many shekels of silver it cost. You almost feel like you're at the real estate closing attorney's office, signing the paperwork when the Bible gives you all these details. But the reason it reminds me of Jeremiah is because when Jeremiah purchased this piece of land, the Babylonian Empire had surrounded Jerusalem. They were laying siege. Jeremiah was the prophet that told everybody, we will be overthrown. Babylon will burn the city to the ground. Nebuchadnezzar will take the people away into exile. All of that land was going to be worthless. Nevertheless, God told Jeremiah, go buy a piece of land. So he buys this piece of land, knowing that in any day, the Babylonians would make all of that land worthless. Why did he do it? It was his way of saying God has a promise, and we have a future and a hope, and one day the people will return from exile to this place. So he bought the land. I think Abraham was doing something similar. He was a foreigner living in a tent, but one day this promised land would belong to all of his descendants. And the New Testament shows us a little more of the future and the faith that Abraham had when Hebrews 11 verse 10 says the reason Abraham could live in tents as a foreigner in a strange land was because he was searching for a city with foundations whose builder and architect is God. In other words, Abraham was searching for his heavenly city. Abraham knew this world was not his ultimate home. And even though he put Sarah in a tomb, in a cemetery like this, we know death for us is not the end. It's just a doorway that leads to life everlasting. We have a better home waiting for us one day in heaven. If you're a Christian, this is not a place of endings. This is just a place we pass through to our future home in heaven. So, even though it felt like a morbid passage with cemetery plots and real estate transactions, it's actually quite encouraging when you realize that we have a promise as well, and it's a heavenly one. And I hope that blesses you today. Have a great rest of your Monday, and we'll see you again tomorrow.